Hello, everyone. I have a very difficult job this afternoon competing with barbecue in your belly, so I'm going to make you do some work first. Could you all just stand up and give a round of applause to the rest of the speakers today in the foundation? Hasn't the day been fantastic, right? It's been really wonderful. So I was excited when I learned the topic was storytelling today. I'm a story guy. One of the first jobs I remember wanting was being a pastor, because I thought all you did was stand in front of people and tell stories. So I'm very happy to be here right now. I was also an English major. How many of the people in the room were English majors? And they said we couldn't get jobs, right? Look at us now, huh? So I believe the story is one of the most important things we all have. And today's conference is just part of a larger trend about stories and nonprofits. So I'm from D.C., and in D.C., the Meyer Foundation, which is a local foundation there, is also big on this initiative. They have a Stories Worth Telling initiative with Georgetown, where they're trying to say that, that stories are an essential component of nonprofit communications. And Rick Moyers, who's the vice president for communications there, who writes for us frequently, recently wrote this elsewhere. I've become convinced that almost all nonprofits could engage more supporters and have a greater impact if only they were better at telling their stories. So the only one that feels that way. The Baltimore Symphony Orchestra a few weeks ago announced that they were going to have an embedded reporter role, which is a role within their organization dedicated entirely to telling stories about the symphony. And we wrote a story about this, and Eileen Andrews, who's their vice president of marketing communications, says that it's not sales-focused, it's not stories about concerts, it's not trying to sell tickets. They're trying to meet people where they are with the content that they want. This is interesting content first. And just to tell a story about the impact of stories, this is where I'll start. And thank you for introducing the concept of bricolage this morning, because I think that way a lot. So we're going to be all over the place. So let's start in 1753, which is a strange era for a web editor to start at. But let's explain kind of where the U.S. was then. And this is also there was a gentleman who said he wanted people to have more history lessons, so this is today's history lesson for you. In 1753 in the U.S., Virginia was a large part of the country. It stretched the whole way up to the Great Lakes and out west. At that point, western Pennsylvania, like Pittsburgh, was the great frontier. And England was claiming it, and France was claiming it. They were coming up from Louisiana. They were coming down from Canada. And at that time, there was a very important mission, which is one of the most important missions in our country's history, which we don't hear much about. So let's meet our hero first. So he was born here. He was the first son of his father's second wife, the third son in the family. They owned land. They were farmers. They were middling Virginia family. They weren't the gentry. They did all right. Things were tough for him. His father died when he was 11. His older half-brothers went to England for their education. He didn't get that opportunity because his father died. He had to work the farm. He also wanted to join the Royal Navy, the English Royal Navy, and his mother wouldn't allow him. Her husband had just died. She wanted to keep her son close. So he ended up joining the Ohio Company and the Virginia Militia, where he explored out west and did some surveying and everything. And so when he's 21 years old, here's a picture of him a little bit later. When he's 21 years old, the governor of Virginia comes to him. And the young man had just been elevated to an assistant role, the governor of Virginia, where his older brother had died, and he was the one person who held that role. When his older brother died, who was the core of their family, he really stepped up. He was the one that they all expected to do great things. So they took his role and they turned it into 4 roles, and he filled one of them. So the governor of Virginia comes to him and says, I have this very important mission. There are French forts on the frontier. We need you to take a message up there, close to the shores of Lake Erie. So he sets off on this journey, and this is a map that he drew there. And the bottom red X there is Pittsburgh. He gets there. Pittsburgh didn't exist yet. It was just a fork in the river. And he lays it out, and he says, this would be a great place for a fort. It controls both. And he takes this long trip up the Allegheny River and up French Creek to the second X. On the way, he works with local tribes. He meets, a lot of French traders. And he gets there, and he delivers his message, and he's held up for a few days by the general commanding there. And the general says, we kind of like it here. Thanks, England, but we're going to stay. So he comes back, delivers this message to the governor of Virginia, and on the way back, he's almost killed. He captures his attempted murderer, ties him to a tree, and then lets him free later that night. He's a very just, very understanding guy. He almost dies. His assistant, his guide, saves him. Comes back, and the governor says, this is a great story. I want you to write it down for me. He has 24 hours, and he writes down his notes. And the governor runs and publishes it in every newspaper and prints it as a book. And it's spread throughout the colonies, and it's spread through England. And this is the first introduction that the world has had to this young general or this young major who ends up becoming George Washington. So later, when the Americans are looking for someone to lead their military, they turn to him. Later, when they're looking to elect their first king, because that was their idea at first, not president, they turn to this man who had this great adventure, who showed all of the characteristics that they wanted in a leader. He was brave, he was understanding. He understood this frontier that a lot of people in Europe and even the colonies didn't quite understand. He was just, he was fair, he was kind. The hard part is doing all of this. The easy part is telling people and spreading that message. And without that story, Washington could have been just a major in the Virginia militia. But because of that story, he was elevated to international fame. And so the good news for all of you is you're doing fantastic work. Washington was doing this really important work for England at the time. And he shared the message, and it elevated him. So the important thing is spreading that message. You're putting in the time, you're putting in the effort, so the important thing is spreading the message. So what's your story? Washington's story showed that he was all of his characters. He was brave, he was a great leader, he was just. So I want you to take a minute. I know you all have paper and pencils on your table. I want you to write down a few things that when people see anything from your organization, I want you to write down the characteristics that you want them to think about your organization, adjectives, what you want to communicate. What are the key things that people want to think about? And as you do that, I'll continue talking here. So I'm going to take it back to the basics of what a story is. So there are three things that I think a story is. And this is the first one. I know there's three things here. But a story is a journey, it's a conflict, and it's a pattern. So in every story, we have these three elements. We have the setup. Who are the characters? Who's the protagonist, and who's the antagonist? Now, all of your missions have a protagonist and an antagonist, but we don't often think of it that way. Your protagonists are children of a serious disease. The antagonist is that disease. Your protagonists are the innocent animals who are abused and neglected. The antagonists are the people who are doing that, or just the people who are ignoring that happens. The conflict is inherent in that relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist. This is your mission. The conflict is your mission. What is the thing that you are trying to solve? What's at stake for your protagonist? If we don't cure this disease, if we don't get treatment, if we don't find permanent homes, what's going to happen? What's at stake? And the resolution is what we do to fix that problem, what happens next, and who will do it. Answer, of course, you will do it, the donors will do it, the volunteers will do it, and what's next? So Gustav Freytag, who was a novelist and playwright in Germany a long time ago, another history lesson, laid out these 5 elements of the narrative arc. Exposition, rising action, working on it, climax, it could go either way, the falling action toward victory, and then the resolution. And these are the areas where we usually tell our stories. Think of each of these points at a place where you put appeals, rising action. We're almost there. We're near this decision point. We're almost getting there. The climax, it could go either way. We need your help to push us over that edge. And the resolution, those are the stories of your successes. They're so important to tell. And it's important to know that your audience has been on this trip before. They know what to expect. There are certain patterns that every story knows. You know, there's the origin story, there's rags to riches, things like that. Whenever you can create an additional conflict from varying from the story arc a little bit, by giving people something they don't expect, everyone sees the same messaging over and over again. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later. A story is a relationship. Carol had talked about this a little bit before. When you put something out into the world, you have very little control over what happens next. Michael Margolis, who runs a consulting firm and was a guest on a chat with us a while ago, wrote, as a storyteller, you're forever at the mercy of your audience. They get to decide whether they resonate or reject your message. So you have to think about your audience a lot and how to help them self-identify and see themselves in the story. And your audience will always fill in the blanks, more than even you expect. Story is just the beginning. They're going to create a narrative around everything you do and tell themselves a story, even beyond your story. That's where the elements, like in Washington's story, come in. They saw that he was brave, and that's the story that they extracted from the original text. So there's a story that's not necessarily true, but it's a great story, so I'll tell it anyway. In the 1920s in Paris, there's this tale that a lot of the expat writers got together, and they all put $10 on the table. They said, whoever can write the best 6-word story wins the pot. So the story is that Ernest Hemingway took the bet and came back with this. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. It's devastating, right? It's only 6 words, and you put this entire narrative around it. You saw that, and you created the story. And that's what everything that you produce does with your audience. Every one of your appeals generates a story in their mind. And I know that there's a lot of groans in this. Automatically, everyone goes to the dark place. I like to think that the guests of their baby shower just ignored the registry, and they just got 90 baby shoes. So, Switzer Navasan, who's the chief digital officer at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, who was also a guest on a webinar recently, gives this list pretty regularly when he speaks, that your tweets, your Facebook postings, et cetera, should have as many of these attributes as possible. And I think that all of your communication should have as many of these attributes as possible. And these should be some of the things that maybe you have written down on the paper as well. So he wants everything that he posts to be helpful, useful, timely, informative, relevant, practical, actionable, generous, credible, collaborative, entertaining, fun, and occasionally funny, because it's really hard to be funny. So this is the cautionary tale. Don't make your story just about you. And this is where Pharrell Williams comes in, of course. Bricolage moment. Pharrell, how many of you have happy stuck in your head almost constantly? Right? So this is not Pharrell Williams' first solo record. A little more than 10 years ago, he had a solo record, and the single on that was Can I Have It Like That? I bought that album. It was all right. The peak chart position was 49th in the US for that single. Now we can't avoid happy. So he was recently on CBS, and he said this about his first album. It's more bragging than it is anything else. So when I made that record, it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I had to really take a long study of what I was doing and talking about on that record. And he goes on to say that he was trying to tell someone else's story. He saw what Jay-Z was doing with bragging about money and power and talking about that, but he didn't have the rest of the narrative that Jay-Z had of the rags to riches thing. He had his own story. And so when he was trying to do that, it came off as all about him, and in a way it was, and he admits it here, and not all about the audience. And here, now we're always clapping along. And now the peak chart position is first in the US and 11 other countries. And just looking, when we're talking about everything telling a story, just look at the visuals, 2 stills from his videos in those 2 eras. Here, he stands while the rest of the dancers dance, and here, he's dancing with everyone. He's involving everyone in his story, which is what we all need to do all the time. It's that relationship. That's why everything is a story. Everything that your organization does says something about you. And I mean, this extends to personal lives as well. I don't know how many essays I've read recently about how Facebook is turning live and everyone's individual life into a performance when we post something, when it looks so awesome. So everything you tell is a story. And I'm going to address 4 different areas today. Visuals, video, web design, and press relations, because this is where I spend a lot of my time thinking. So let's start with visuals. So at the Chronicle, we get a lot of images. People send us a lot of images, and the most frequent type of image we see is this, the big check. How many of you have a big check photo? Congratulations on the big check. What story does this tell? Yeah. The story is we got money. Look at this literal big check, maybe figurative as well. And the interesting thing about this picture, because I chose this one particularly, so this is in 2004, and this is the big check ceremony for the X Prize for a reusable space flight device. So it's a $10 million prize. But the much better story is seeing the device. It's seeing the launch. It's seeing the thing itself. And they didn't send us this. I pulled this from the internet. But this illustrates the point perfectly. So Sue, our art director, always says this. So you could have the best story. You could do the best work. But without, photos, news media outlets might ignore you, especially as photo crazed as we all are. We need to see that proof. Think about, if you go to your Facebook news feed right now, look at how many photos there are. And if your post doesn't have a photo, how easy is it to skip over? So an organization that does a great job with this is Team Rubicon. They always send photographers out on all of their missions. If you're not familiar with the organization, it's recent veterans who are just out of the service. They're using the skills they learned in the military to then help in disaster relief. So they do a lot of really interesting work, and they kind of deploy. And so this picture tells a story. On the right, we see a veteran, and on the left, we see a local disaster relief staff member, moving this log. And is it a ridiculously great picture? No, but it's there, and it's on the ground, and it's showing results. Another organization that is always good about taking program photos is Mending Kids International, which deploys these medical missions to do kind of a marathon of surgeries in developing parts of the world to help children who are facing serious medical issues. They're very good. Each one of these photos tells a very different, very moving story and shows the work that they do. And here's another. And when I'm talking about challenging expectations, when I say people have been on this ride before, when they've seen stories over and over again, you want to show any tension, anything that will draw people in as much as possible. I can never remember the name of this organization, so I'm going to read it. So this is from the Pulmonary Hypertension Association. You can't blame me for that. Come on. Path for a Cure. So they have this Path for a Cure fundraiser where a couple of doctors that worked with them regularly hiked Mount Kilimanjaro. And it's very easy to show them out hiking, that they're going to go do this thing. But the fact that they're doctors hiking, there creates a tension. Why are these doctors wearing hiking boots? I mean, it's a question that will draw people in and get them to, Carol talked about earlier, the text, not ignoring the text. This is something that will draw people in. Wherever you can create that tension and, counteract those expectations, it's a strong image. Thinking about staff photos as well. How many of you have staff photos for your organization? So you have very small staff. And are they just regular portraits, or do you have them working with your cause? So this is from the Environmental Defense Fund a few years ago. This is a story, this one with a story in CNN Money of their board. This is their board of directors out showing what really matters to them and the organization, and what type of people serve on that board. A similar in a different way example is from Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. If you're familiar with that organization, they work with children who have cancer to provide them services and also medical research. And the story of their founding is that this little girl, Alex, who had cancer and eventually lost her battle, started selling lemonade on her front lawn to help other kids with cancer and fund medical research, which is a really great story. So each of their staff have these photos with the lemons, which harkens back to that original story, which is, part of this is, you can call it branding or marketing, but it's also storytelling, to go back to that original story. Another great example, how many business cards have y'all collected today? Good, been doing networking? Excellent. So this is from Conservation International a few years ago. Each of their business cards had, I think they selected up to a dozen different pictures showing their mission. So when they would be out at a conference, if they would be working with a donor, if they would be talking to someone from foundation, they would hand them the card. And that was an entry point for them to start talking about the work that they did. So it's not just photos on a card. They show things that you've never seen or could see on your own. This is when people start asking questions, and you have an opportunity to share your mission. I was at a conference recently when a nonprofit vendor gave me their card, and they worked with kind of an online currency deal where you could donate certain things. And so her business card was like a little metal coin that she had printed up, which is really cool. And it was different shaped, and I think I have it in my pocket. So Narissa, who I was talking to earlier, hi Narissa, her business card today is an entire postcard talking about the next event. It's a strong image there, and her contact information is on here, but so is the event itself. It's a little bit different, it's a little bit visual, and it tells a story about what she's doing and what she's working on now. So let's talk a little bit about video. And like the big check photo, I have an example.
We think first of vague words that are synonyms for progress and pair them with footage of a high-speed train. Science is doing lots of stuff that may or may not have anything to do with us. See how this guy in a lab coat holds up a beaker? That means we do research. Here's a picture of DNA. There are a shitload of people in the world, especially in India. See how we're part of the global economy? Look at those farmers in China. But we also do business in the USA, or want you to think we do. Check out this wind energy thing in Indiana, and this blue-collar guy with dirt on his face. Also, we care about the environment, loosely. Here's some powerful rushing water and people planting trees. Our policies could be related to these panoramic views of Costa Rica. In today's high-speed environment, stop-motion footage of a city at night with cars turning quickly makes you think about doing things efficiently and time passing. Lest you think we're a faceless entity, look at all these attractive people. Here's some of them talking and laughing, and close-ups of hands passing canned goods to each other in a setting that evokes community service. Equality, innovation, honesty, and advancement are all words we choose from a list. Our prophets are awe-inspiring, like this guy who's looking up and pointing at a skyscraper or a kite while smiling and explaining something to his child. Using a specific ratio of Asian people to black people to women to white men, we want to make sure we represent your needs and interests, or at least a version of your skin color in our ads. Did we put a baby in here? What about an ethnic old man whose wrinkled smile represents the happiness and wisdom of the poor? Yep.
See, that's when we talk about our audience being down this road before and seeing the stories, that's the importance of telling a different story and kind of contradicting expectations. So let's talk about a few really popular videos quickly. A few years ago, obviously, everyone has seen Coney, went crazy online. The interesting thing, I mean, it really blew up because it was a powerful story that people hadn't heard before. Of course, a lot of people were quick to point out that that story might be a little problematic, but it had a clear narrative arc. It had an antagonist, it had a protagonist, it had what you could do, and a lot of people thought that was a little bit too simplified, but it had that entire story, and it was something that people hadn't heard before. Another popular video was from the Rainforest Alliance and their Follow the Frog campaign. So how many people have seen this video before? Few. Great. The interesting thing about this video is our protagonist is a man who, and I don't have enough time to show all these, unfortunately, is a man who feels like he's not doing enough to protect the rainforest, and so he decides that he's going to leave his family and hike down into the rainforest and literally follow the frog through the rainforest and join a tribe and try to fulfill all of these like Avatar, Last of the Mohicans expectations of what he should be doing. And he ends up losing a toe and hiking back through Mexico, and his wife leaves him. It's really sad and funny. So the point is, Rainforest Alliance says you don't have to do all this. You can just look for the frog on individual labels, and that's all you need to do. There's the clear story arc, and then at the end, it gives you the basic call to action that you can do. And it's a story that part of it we've seen before, but it challenges expectations. Another one, this was popular, I think, last Thanksgiving or maybe the year before, Homeless Veteran Time-Lapse, and this was for a nonprofit, I think it's The Gage Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So this video is incredibly simple, and as I go with these videos, they're going to get more and more simple. This is just a time-lapse of a homeless veteran who, when you see him at the beginning, has long hair, long beard, dirty clothes. You know, they cut his hair, they shave his beard, they put him in a suit, and it's 2 minutes of that transition. And then at the end, and I captured this moment for the still, is this is the first time he sees himself in the mirror after that. And the shocking, the look on his face, and he gets up and he goes directly over to the video producer and hugs him. And it's a really great video with a great message and a story arc. And you don't need a complex story here because you're building that message, like so many other things, you're building the message in your mind around it. This humanizes this man. This shows the mission of the charity. And it tells a little bit of information after, and he turned things around and was doing really well. Another very simple video that has been incredibly powerful, this was the first It Gets Better video with Dan Savage and his husband Terry. It's really simple. As far as production value goes, it's relatively low. It's them sitting at a table with a microphone telling the story. And again, we have our clear antagonist and protagonist. We have our clear story arc. They talk about how hard things were. And it works its way to the resolution that they're happy now, they're together, and fulfilling their mission of giving hope to LGBT teenagers. And this is the simplest of all the videos. And so in the fall, we held a contest for a 6-second appeal using Vine, sharing and if you could pull this video up, actually. It's only 6 seconds, and it's really simple, but I want you to see all that it is. All it is this guy taking one breath, and then it loops. So our challenge was, in 6 seconds, tell us why we should support your organization. What is it that makes your mission special? So, again, 6 seconds, really simple. This breath made possible by an organ donor, brought to you by the United Network for Organ Sharing. And I ran into the woman whose team created this video at a conference in the spring, and the man in this video actually is a double lung transplant recipient. And it was already moving before, but now that you know that, it's so much better. And the thing that's really interesting about this is that, again, you create the entire narrative around this. This is a reason to support. You see this man breathing, and in your head, subconsciously, you're thinking, if that donor hadn't been there, what would have happened? How many people are waiting for a donation? And that's one of the really interesting things about that. Let's talk a little bit about web design. So the interesting thing about web design is the youngest generation right now, the millennials, curriculum Generation C. These are a tricky bunch of donors. So 3 out of 4 millennial donors said they were turned off when a nonprofit's website had not been updated recently. Again, they're creating that story about your organization. They see that your website hasn't been updated. They don't think that your organization is effective because for them, that's basic. That's what they expect. 6 in 10 said they wanted nonprofits to share stories about successful projects and programs and appreciated information about an organization's cause and the people it serves. And other research shows that this is a generation that doesn't care as much about organizations, but more about causes. So they want to see the effect of their donations, and they want to see what your organization actually does on the ground. And Steve Krug, there's this entire field of user experience research on websites, and Steve Krug wrote one of the must-read books for this. So the most important thing you can do is just understand the basic principle of eliminating question marks. When someone goes to your page, it should be clear for them where to go, what your organization does. They shouldn't have any unanswered questions that they have to craft their own narrative around. You should guide them there. So we're going to look at a couple of sites. So one's website, very simple, very, very simple. There are really a few things to do here, but looking at this screen alone, you know what it is they do. They know what it is that they want you to do. They are working to end extreme poverty. They want you to join that fight. And they have the rest of this information that supports that. And if you notice, their navigation at the very top is very simple. Your options are take action, read stories, and about the organization. And then join the campaign to end extreme poverty. Another organization I want to point out is Splash. So we can click into this one. Hopefully my links aren't backwards. Okay. So Splash is an organization that obviously works with water issues. They try to get water into schools in the developing world. So when you see this website, even from their logo on down, you know what it is that they work on. You know what their issue is. And in the carousel there, how to kill your charity, yes, that's a good thing. You're going to hear a little bit more about that tomorrow. But they challenge your expectations right from the start. And it's very clear what they want you to do here as well. They're eliminating as many question marks as they can. They give you their navigation options: why, stories, where, how, about, and updates. They point you almost directly to sign up for current news, videos, and stories. And then to walk you through their organization, they introduce a character, Jorana here. If you click on follow along there, we can go in there. Okay, and then scroll down. So as you scroll down, Jorana here, because of the aspect ratio, you might not be able to see it, you follow her through the entire path. You see her life and her family. You see what her school is like. And they're dealing with unsafe water, which is the core mission of the organization, to get water, safe water in schools. Okay, and then scroll down. And they have to go to the restroom. And now they all have safe water and clean hands, which shows the entire arc of that story there. We have the conflict, we have our protagonist, we have the problem laid out, and it's as simple as scrolling down to get that entire story. This is a really interesting, engaging way to do that. So I'm going to click back to the PowerPoint. And this is an organization I worked for and a project I worked on for Goodwill Industries International. So how many people are familiar with the Goodwill store? How many people think that Goodwill's mission is the Goodwill store? Oh, really? Nobody? Oh, you do? Great. So Goodwill's actual mission, and this is a problem for them, is because people think that the store is their mission, providing affordable goods. They actually, that's their fundraising arm to raise money for job development programs for people with disabilities, people who are re-entering the workforce after time in prison, veterans, that kind of thing. So that's a big challenge for them because their public face is the store. It was a challenge when I worked there as well. So they recently went through a website redesign, and one of the interesting things that they did is, click on the link and see if that pulls up. The interesting thing that they did is for a while now, great, they've been doing this My Story blog where they ask program participants to share their story, what it is that Goodwill did for you and how your life was before and after. So there are people who were dealing with substance abuse issues who now have a full-time job, can support their family, and they put these stories front and center on the site. Obviously the retail operation is important for their fundraising, but they want people to understand what they do. So if you scroll down a little bit more, so there you'll see strong photos of these people, and they share their story and their entire personal narrative arc, which is really powerful when you see what the organization has done for them and what they're working on now. We can go back to the slides now. Let's talk a little bit about press relations as well and sharing your story with the press. I get a lot of press releases. I would say 50 to 60 a day. Occasionally one of them has a salutation like this. Dear Ms. Cody Switzer, blogger. Yeah, right? This is a problem. So I'm not insulted. I have an androgynous name, kind of. I understand that. It's just, you could take just a little bit of time to understand the reporter. What type of stories do they write? What is their coverage area, and how would they like to be pitched? Reaching out directly to a reporter is really powerful, and here's why. Here's the press release workflow. At one point in history, press releases came to reporters like this. There was one fax machine or one mailbox in the office, and one editor or staffer would go through the fax machine, and they would direct it to the correct reporter. Now the press release goes to every reporter in the organization often, so the same 60 press releases could go to several of us in the office, even though we work on different things. The problem with that is they start to be ignored. You'll get them, you'll get a press release, and if it's from the same address that the last 7 have been from that didn't apply to you, you'll start ignoring it. The difference that you can do here, and the strategy that I recommend always, is to become a resource. And to do that, 1, you have to understand what the reporter works on, and 2, you have to share good stories even if they aren't yours, which is a hard thing. I know we're all working so hard to get attention to our causes that it's a little bit harder, but you know the nonprofit sector, you know everyone in your area working there, you might have partners, you know other organizations. And so becoming a resource for a reporter and being able to point them in the right direction will make sure that your emails always get read. And remember to both give and receive. It's not, you need to give information and help a reporter. And there's actually a site now, Help a Reporter Out. I think it's haro.com maybe, where reporters can post appeals. And if you're an expert in that field, you can go on and answer their questions. It's really powerful. So this is a little bit of homework. Ask a key local reporter or editor out for coffee, see what they're working on and how you can help. You're at this conference, so you can email them and say, I've just been at this great conference. I have some ideas for stories about the nonprofit sector. It's not a secret that at a lot of local newspapers, they've cut back a lot. And one of the things that they cut back a lot, unfortunately, which is really concerning to us at the Chronicle, is that they cut back on coverage of nonprofits and philanthropy. And so it's usually a business reporter who covers that a part of the time. But if you can come to them with a really interesting story, say, I know someone was talking about earlier waiting for a while, I think it was over here, waiting for a while for IRS approval for 501c3, that could be a local story. If you find 2 other charities that are doing the same thing, it's a trend. And so Make it easy to cover your group. Here's the other thing. It is a trend. 3 is a trend. That's the secret. If you have 3 examples, it becomes a trend. So make it easy to cover your group. Have the basics listed out somewhere on your website, the basics of what your organization does. That's really simple, but something that a lot of organizations miss. Put contact information on your press page. There are a lot of forms to just go into an email box, and I understand that there's practical reasons for that, but the first default is to email someone directly or call someone and having a contact there. It's major. And make your photos easy to download, which seems like a very small thing to do, but Carol had pointed out Charity Water before, but one of the great things that they do on their press page and on a lot of their pages is they make it easy for both reporters and the public to download a whole zip file of all of these really powerful images of the work that they do. And then you have that for stories, or you have that for your supporters to share on social media. And there are reasons to control that, but the reasons to control that are far outweighed by the benefit of making it easy to share. So I want you to take a look at the things that you wrote down at the beginning of my talk here. Those attributes that you wanted to portray. Think about everything that your organization does now in terms of communication. Think about your website, if you have any videos. Think about your photos. Think about your social media outreach. Think about all of that. Are those coming through? Are those attributes what your organization is telling? Will your audience understand that that's who you are and who you want to be? Because if not, you might need to consider that. And if that's not the one takeaway you get from the session, you at least have a good story about George Washington. So does anyone have any questions? Yeah. We have a...
I have a volunteer who is an excellent writer, who actually writes the story, sends the pictures, and usually, more often than not, they're published in the paper versus me sending something in for the publisher to write up or fix up. I actually have a writer that helps with articles that I'd like to get published, to do the writing, the pictures, and send it in. And usually there are no changes made to it, and it gets in there a lot quicker and easier.
That's great. And that's the one thing, especially for the smaller organizations in the room. I know there are quite a few of you. I mean, always think not just about press coverage, but also in terms of op-eds. So the opinion page of your local paper is always looking for contributors, especially if there's some story in the paper that relates to your issue. It's a good opportunity to make yourself appear as an expert and to get your name out there as well. There's a question back there. Comment?
I was wondering what your thoughts are on nonprofits being able to tell a story that can cut through all of the noise. I mean, everyone here is all trying to tell their story, and how do you cut through the noise of so many stories?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, we face that too. There's a lot of information out there, which is a problem. I think I'll go back to one of the things that make things shareable, and that's one of the big ways. You know, people used to search or go directly to your site. I mean, a lot of traffic is, more and more traffic is driven to sites because of social sharing. One of the big things is to challenge those preconceptions. So how many people here saw the movie Frozen? How many people have kids and saw the movie Frozen 17 times? All right. So I watched it on the plane last night, actually. And the one thing that was interesting about that movie is that there's an obvious storyline in all of those Disney princess movies. And you know exactly what's going to happen in the end. And I'm not going to spoil it for anyone. But what do you expect to happen doesn't happen in the end. And that's where deviating a little bit from the script, making something stick out, is what's so powerful. And it's really challenging. But there are those standard story arcs, and just telling the story in a little bit of a different way is one powerful way that people will share it, challenging those expectations. Question back there.
Most reporters recognize high-end public relations companies by name. They don't recognize my name. Is there a way to pique their interest? Is there a saying? Is there a catchphrase? I'm not a big PR firm, but listen to me.
You could start there. Nothing against big PR firms. And a lot of their stuff is really great, and a lot of them are doing really good work. It's the organizations that lean on the press release as their only communication strategy is really the big point there. I think that calling someone, there's so much noise. How often does your phone ring in your office? You know? There's so much noise in email, and you eventually have to do something with that. But calling someone on the phone and just asking them what they're working on is that direct human communication, which is something we don't do as much as we used to, is really powerful. And I think that subject lines are tough, and there's a lot of thought about just testing subject lines, but try to say something like, I have an interesting story idea for you, or I'd like to talk about some of the work we're doing at, I don't know what kind of organization you're in, but make it very, there's a lot of headlines that are like news headlines. If you make it more of a personal thing, especially with their name in it, and if you show that you know something about them, that's helpful. And that would work for me at least. I think the things that I receive that are most obviously, and it's tricky because some people are now doing this, but are most obviously human written and conversational are the things that I'll open first in my inbox. So that's the easiest. So, yes?
How do you get, local, press to care about the work that you do, but that's not here? Because our organization, we work primarily with children in Haiti, and I contacted a reporter recently. She was all excited, and she wanted to get in touch, come out and film the kids and blah, 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 and I had to say, you didn't read my email correctly. Yeah. I work with children in Haiti, and I was talking to them about the camp experience that we provided. So how do I get folks here to care about what I'm doing there?
Yeah, that's a challenge. Do you have local people who go down to run the camp, or is it all in Haiti?
Well, yes, and folks in Haiti as well that work along with us.
Yeah, I think starting with a local reporter is starting maybe with the angle of here's this group of people who recently did this, and coming back with like the full story there ready is something that you can start. I mean, thinking outside of maybe just the front page and the business section is always something that's helpful. So it might be a feature story. It might even end up being maybe something in travel, talking about this trip that you recently made. I think that starting with the local people that went down and working back from there is the easiest with a local reporter. And making yourself an expert, so make yourself an expert on like the population of people from Haiti in your area makes you a source that they'll turn to, and you can talk about your work that you did there. If you work with the people in the local area, that's one way. So
two things. I noticed on the new websites, and I'm seeing this a lot because, like I tell everybody, I think it's analogous to in 1980 when you had your kitchen done, and you had all the latest technology, and now everybody looks at your kitchen and goes, wow, you need a do-over. Yeah. So I think a lot of us are in that position, but we don't have the funds to hire somebody to do the really glossy, slick kind of thing. What I am seeing is everybody's doing the same thing now again, what we all did before, the rolling scroll. I see it in the similarity there. Yeah. I guess that's one comment. My next one is, what is the impact of having the celebrity story added to your marketing plan and your website versus kind of the personal story, or do you recommend both, or?
So first, I think, so if you have a website right now, the easiest thing that you can do, even without much of a budget, a lot of websites look exactly the same, and three of the ones I showed, they all kind of have that box. Every website you go to is now just boxes stacked on top of each other. It looks like Tetris. The easiest thing you can do is take a really hard look at your homepage and look at not just your homepage, but your inner pages, and look at, one, your navigation, and two, how many options you're giving for people to click all over. And think about where you actually want to direct people. The easiest thing you can do to improve your website is take things away sometimes. There are entirely too many options, and it can overwhelm people. It's the paralysis of choice. There's been a lot of research into that. They don't know where to click. So eliminating those question marks and compressing your website into fewer choices is the first help. And I think that I've seen organizations that have done both. I mean, the celebrity testimonial definitely has a place. And, even on one of the top stories in the right corner was that Akon was now supporting one. And then below, they had some other campaign stories. I think there's a mix. One of the biggest things that the celebrity can provide you is, some people put a lot of stock in them providing you legitimacy. So having them there is good. Also, using their voice to share the stories of individual people is probably the most powerful thing you can do, because they have that built-in audience, and you want to get those stories of the people you've served out before all else. So now I'm over time, but thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.